It's MamaBorg's Fun Time Educational Hour. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Kurt Vonnegut. So this week in COVID learning, I sent home a story called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Kurt Vonnegut, which I thought would be a little tongue-in-cheek fun for, our 8th or 9th week in quarantine, depending on where you live and who you are and if you are on vacation or not. I've been at home with my honey for 49 days straight now. And it's not what we're used to, but we're getting used to it. So we're going to read this story, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Kurt Vonnegut. The title comes from a Shakespeare play. We'll do the monologue on that later. Okay, I'm going to keep me up in the screen a little bit. Most of you say you don't even watch the videos, you just listen while you do other things. That's fine. I am going to have the text behind this time. I am going to be reading the text on the screen, so sorry for not making eye contact. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Kurt Vonnegut. The year was 2158 AD, and Lou and Emerald Schwartz were whispering on the balcony outside Lou's family apartment on the 76th floor of Building 257 in Alden Village, a New York housing development that covered what had once been known as Southern Connecticut. When Lou and Emerald had married, M's parents had tearfully described the marriage as being between May and December. But now, with Lou 112 and M 93, M's parents had to admit that the match had worked out well. But Em and Lou weren't without their troubles, and they were out in the nippy air of the balcony because of them. Sometimes I get so mad. I feel like up and diluting his anti-gerasone, said Em. That'd be against nature, Em, said Lou. It'd be murder. Besides, if he caught us tinkering with his anti-gerasone, not only would he disinherit us, he'd bust my neck. Just because he's 172 doesn't mean Gramps isn't strong as a bull. I'm going to pause here really quick. There's an error in this text. It says Cramps. It really should be Gramps because he's the elder patriarch of the family. And I want you to note a couple of things immediately. Lou and M are really old. Lou is 112, M is 93, and Gramps is 172 years old. This is in the future. Anti-gerasone, which I'm probably totally mispronouncing, but anti-gerasone is a drink that people consume which keeps them alive for a really long time. And all of the family lives together in this house. Sometimes I get so mad I just feel like up and diluting his anti-gerasone, said M. That'd be against nature, M. It's murder. Besides, if he caught us tinkering with his anti-gerasone, not only would he disinherit us, he'd bust my neck. Just because he's 172 doesn't mean Gramps isn't strong as a bull. Strong as a bull, said Lenny. Against nature, said M. Who knows what nature's like anymore? Oh, I don't guess I could ever bring myself to dilute his anti-gerasone or anything like that. But gosh, Lou, a body can't help thinking. Gramps isn't ever going to leave if somebody else doesn't help him along. Golly, we're so crowded, a person can hardly turn around, and Verna's dying for a baby, and Melissa's gone 30 years without one. She stamped her feet. I get so sick of seeing his wrinkled old face, watching him take the only private room and the best chair and the best food and getting to pick out what to watch on TV and running everybody's life by changing his will all the time. Well, after all, said Lou bleakly, Gramps is head of the family, and he can't help being wrinkled like he is. He was 70 before anti-gerasone was invented. He's gonna leave M. Just give him time. It's his business. I know he's tough to live with, but be patient. It wouldn't do to do anything that'd rile him. After all, we've got it better than anybody else there on the daybed. How much longer do you think we'll get to sleep on the daybed before he picks another pet? The world's record's 2 months, isn't it? Mom and Pop had it that long once, I guess. When's he gonna leave, Lou? Well, he's talking about giving up anti-gerasone right after the 500-mile speedway race. Yes, and before that it was the Olympics, and before that it was the World Series, and before that the presidential elections, and before that, I don't know what. It's just been one excuse after another for 50 years now. I don't think we're ever going to get a room to ourselves or an egg or anything. All right, call me a failure, said Lou. What can I do? I work hard and make good money, but the whole thing practically is taxed away for defense and old age pensions. And It wasn't taxed anyway. Where'd you think we'd find a vacant room to rent? Iowa, maybe? Well, who wants to live on the outskirts of Chicago? Em put her arms around his neck. Lou, hun, I'm not calling you a failure. The Lord knows you're not. You just haven't had a chance to be anything or have anything because Gramps and the rest of his generation won't leave and let somebody else take over. Yeah, said Lou gloomily. You can't exactly blame him, though, can you? I mean, I wonder how quick we'll knock off the anti-gerasone when we get to be Gramps' age. Sometimes I wish there wasn't any anti-gerasone, said Emerald passionately, or I wish it was made of something real expensive and hard to get instead of mud and dandelions. Sometimes I just wish folks would up and die regular as clockwork without anything to say about it instead of deciding themselves how long they're going to stay around. There ought to be a law against selling the stuff to anybody over 150. Bad chance of that, said Lou. With all the money and votes the old people have got. He looked at her closely. Are you ready to up and die, Em? Well, for heaven's sakes, what a thing to say to your wife, hun. I'm not even 100 yet. And she ran her hands slightly over her firm and youthful figure as though for confirmation. The best years of my life are still ahead of me. You can bet that when 150 rolls around, old Em's going to pour her anti-gerasone down the sink and just quit taking up room, and she'll do it smiling. Oh, sure, said Lou, I bet. That's what they all say. How many of you heard of doing it, actually? Well, there was that man in Delaware. Oh, ain't you getting sick and tired of talking about him, Em? That was 5 months ago. All right, then, Grandma Winkler, right here in the same building. Oh, she got smeared by a subway. That was just the way she picked to go, said Em. Then what was she doing carrying a 6-pack of anti-gerasone when she got it? Emerald shook her head wearily and covered her eyes. I don't know. All I know is something's got to be done, she sighed. Sometimes I wish they would have left a couple diseases kicking around somewhere so I could get one and go to bed for a little while. Too many people, she cried, and her words cracked and gabbled and died in 1,000 asphalt-paved skyscraper-walled courtyards. Lou laid his hand on her shoulder tenderly. Aw, hun, I hate to see you in the dumps like this. Oh, if we just had a car like the old days, said Em, we could go for a drive and get away from people for a little while. Gee, if those weren't the days. Yeah, said Lou, before they used up all the metal. Oh, we'd hop in and pop a drive up to a filling station and say, fill her up. That was nuts, wasn't it, before they used up all the gasoline. Oh, and we'd go for a carefree ride in the country. Yeah, it all seems like fairyland now, doesn't it? Hard to believe there really used to be all that space between cities. And when we got hungry, said Em, we'd find ourselves a restaurant, walk in, big as you please, and say, I'll have a steak and french fries, I believe, or how are the pork chops today? She licked her lips and her eyes glistened. Yeah, man, growled Lou. How'd you like a hamburger with the works, Em? Oh, And if anybody offered us processed seaweed in those days, we would have spit right in his eye, huh, Em? Or processed sawdust, said Em. Doggedly, Lou tried to find the cheery side of the situation. Well, anyway, they've got the stuff, so it tastes a lot less like seaweed than it did at first, and they say it's actually better for us than what we used to eat. Oh, I felt fine, said Em, fiercely. Lou shrugged. Well, you've got to realize the world wouldn't be able to support 12 billion people if it wasn't for processed seaweed and sawdust. I mean, it's a wonderful thing, really, I guess. That's what they say. They say the first thing that pops in their head, said Em. She closed her eyes. Golly, remember shopping, Lou? Remember how the stores used to fight to get our folks to buy something? You didn't have to wait for somebody to die to get a bed or chair or stoves or anything like that. You just went in and bing, you bought whatever you wanted. Gee whiz, that was nice, before they used up all the raw materials. I was just a kid then, but I remember so plain. Depressed, Lou walked listlessly to the balcony's edge and looked up at the clean, cold, bright stars against the black velvet of infinity. Oh, remember when we used to be bugs on science fiction, Em? Flight 17, leaving for Mars. Launch ramp 12. Board. All technical personnel kindly remain in the bunkers. 10 seconds. 8 seconds. 9, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Main stage. Broom! Why worry about what's going on Earth, said Em, looking up at the stars with him. In another few years, we'd all be shooting through space to start life all over again on a new planet. Lou sighed. Only it turns out you need something about twice the size of the Empire State Building to get one lousy colonist to Mars. And for another couple $1,000,000,000, he could take his wife and his dog. Oh, that's the way to lick overpopulation. Immigrate. Lou? Mm-hmm. When's the 500-mile speedway race? Memorial Day, May 30th. She bit her lip. Is that awful for me to ask? Not very, I guess. Everybody in the apartments looked up to make sure. I don't want to be awful, but you've got to listen to these. You've got to talk these things over every now and again just to get them out of your system. Sure. Do you feel better? Yeah, and I'm not going to lose my temper anymore. I'm just going to be as nice to him as I know how. That's my Em. And they squared their shoulders bravely and went back inside. Gramps Schwartz, his chin resting on his hands in the crook of his cane, was staring irascibly at the 5-foot television screen that dominated the room. On the screen, a news commentator was summarizing the day's happenings. Every 30 seconds or so, Gramps would jab the floor with his cane tip and shout, "Hell, we did that 100 years ago!" Emerald and Lou, coming in from the balcony, were obliged to take seats in the back row behind Lou's father and mother, brother and sister-in-law, son and daughter-in-law, grandson and wife, granddaughter and husband, great-grandson and wife, nephew and wife, great-grandnephew and wife, great-grandniece and husband, great-grandnephew and wife, and of course, Gramps, who was in front of everybody. All, save Gramps, was somewhat withered and bent, seemed by pre-anti-gerasone standards to be about the same age, to be somewhere between their late 20s and early 30s. So this anti-gerasone keeps everybody very young for a very, very, very long time. And it wasn't made until Gramps was 70-something. So Gramps looks old. Everybody else looks very young. But as we heard, Em and Lou are close to or over 100 years old. Meanwhile, the commentator was saying, Council Bluffs, Iowa was still threatened by a stark tragedy. But 200 weary rescue workers have refused to give up hope and continue to dig in an effort to save Albert Hagedorn, 183, who has been wedged for 2 days in a I wish he'd get to something more cheerful, Emerald whispered to Lou. Silence, shouted Gramps. Next one shoots off his big bazoo while the TV's on is going to find himself cut off without a dollar. And here his voice suddenly softened and sweetened. When they wave that checkered flag at the Indianapolis Speedway, and old Gramps gets ready for the big trip up yonder. He sniffed sentimentally, while his heirs concentrated desperately on not making the slightest sound. For them, the poignancy of the prospective big trip had been dulled somewhat by its having been mentioned by Gramps about once a day for the last 50 years. Dr. Brainerd Keyes Bullard, said the commentator, president of Windonet College, said in an address tonight that most of the world's ills can be traced to the fact that man's knowledge of himself has not kept pace with his knowledge of the physical world. Hell, said Gramps, we said that 100 years ago. In Chicago tonight, said the commentator, a special celebration is taking place in the Chicago Lying-In Hospital. The guest of honor is Lowell W. Hitz, age 0. Hitz, born this morning, is the 25 millionth child to be born in the hospital. The commentator faded and was replaced on the screen by young Hitz, who squalled furiously. Hell, whispered Lou to Emerald. We said that 100 years ago. I heard that, shouted Gramps, and he snapped off the television set, and his petrified descendant stared silently at the screen. You there, boy! I didn't mean anything by it, sir, said Lou. Get me my will. You know where it is. You kids all know where it is. Fetch it, boy. Lou nodded dully and found himself going down the hall, picking his way over bedding to Gramps' room, the only private room in the Schwartz apartment. The other rooms were a bathroom, a living room, and the wide, windowless hallway, which was originally intended to serve as the dining area and which had a kitchenette in one end. 6 mattresses and 4 sleeping bags were dispersed in the hallway and living room, and the daybed in the living room accommodated the 11th couple, the favorites of the moment. On Gramps' bureau was his will, smeared, dog-eared, perforated, and blotched with hundreds of additions, deletions, accusations, conditions, warnings, advice, and homely philosophy. The document was, Lou reflected, a 50-year diary, all jammed into 2 sheets, a garbled, illegible log of day after day of strife. This day, Lou would be disinherited for the 11th time, and it would take him perhaps 6 months of impeccable behavior to regain the promise of a share in the estate. "Boy," called Gramps. "Coming, sir." And Lou hurried back into the living room and handed Gramps the will. "Pen," said Gramps. He was initially offered 11 pens, 1 from each couple. "Not that leaky thing," he said, brushing Lou's pen aside. "Ah, there's a nice one. Good boy, Willie." And he accepted Willie's pen. And that was the tip that they'd all been waiting for. Willie, then Lou's father, was the new favorite. Willie, who looked almost as young as Lou, though 142 years old, did a poor job of concealing his pleasure. He glanced slyly at the daybed, which would become his, and from which Lou and Emerald would have to move back into the hall, back to the worst spot of all by the bathroom door. Gramps missed none of the high drama he'd authored, and he gave his own familiar role everything he had, frowning and running his finger along each line as though he were seeing the will for his first time. He read aloud in a deep, portentous monotone, like a bass tone on a cathedral organ. "I, Harold D. Schwartz, residing in Building 257 of Alden Village, New York City, do hereby make, publish, and declare this to be my last will and testament, hereby revoking any and all former wills and codicils by me at any time heretofore made." He blew his nose importantly and went on, not missing a word, and repeating many for emphasis, repeating in particular his ever more elaborate specifications for a funeral. At the end of these specifications, Gramps was so choked with emotion that Lou thought he might forget why he'd gotten out the will in the first place. But Gramps heroically brought his powerful emotions under control, and after erasing for a full minute, he began to write and speak at the same time. Lou could have spoken the lines for him because he'd heard them so often. "I have had many heartbreaks ere leaving this vale of tears for better land," Gramps said and wrote, "but the deepest hurt of all has been dealt by me by..." And he looked around the group, trying to remember who the malefactor was. Everyone looked hopefully at Lou, who held his hand up resignedly. Gramps nodded and remembered and completed the sentence. "My great-grandson, Louis J. Schwartz." "Grandson, sir," said Lou. "Don't quibble. You're deep enough with me right now, young man," said Gramps, but he changed the trifle. And from there he went on without a misstep through the phrasing of the disinheritance, causes for which were disrespectfulness and quibbling. In the paragraph following, the paragraph that belonged to everyone at the room at one time or another, Lou's name was scratched out, and Willie's name was substituted as heir to the apartment and the biggest plum of all, the double bed in the private bedroom. "So," said Gramps, beaming. He erased the date at the foot of the will, substituted a new one, included the time of day. "Well, time to watch the McGarvey Family." The McGarvey Family was a television serial that Gramps had been following since he was 60, so for 112 years. "I can't wait to see what's going to happen next," he said. Lou detached himself from the group and lay down on his bed of pain by the bathroom. He wished Em would join him, and he wondered where she was. He dozed for a few moments until he was disturbed by someone stepping over him to get into the bathroom. A moment later, he heard a faint gurgling sound, as though something were being poured down the wash basin drain. Suddenly, it entered his mind that maybe Em had cracked up, and that she was in there doing something drastic about Gramps. "Em?" he whispered through the panel. There was no reply. Lou pressed against the door. The worn lock, whose bolt barely engaged in its socket, held for a second and let the door swing inward. "Morty!" gasped Lou. Lou's great-grandnephew, Mortimer, who had just married and brought his wife home to the Schwartz menage, looked at Lou with consternation and surprise. Morty kicked the door shut, but not before Lou had glimpsed what was in his hand. Gramps' enormous economy-sized bottle of anti-gerasone, which had been half emptied and which Morty was refilling to the top with tap water. A moment later, Morty came out, glared defiantly at Lou, and brushed past him wordlessly to rejoin his pretty bride. Shocked, Lou didn't know what on earth to do. He couldn't let Gramps take the mouse-trapped anti-gerasone, but if he warned Gramps about it, Gramps would certainly make life in the apartment, which was merely insufferable now, harrowing. Lou glanced into the living room and saw that the Schwartzes, Emerald among them, were momentarily at rest, relishing the botches that the McGarveys had made of their lives. Stealthily, he went into the bathroom and he locked the door as well he could, and he began to pour the contents of Gramps' bottle down the drain. He was going to refill it with full-strength anti-gerasone from the 22 smaller bottles on the shelf. The bottle contained a half-gallon, and its neck was so small it seemed to Lou that emptying it would take forever. The almost imperceptible smell of anti-gerasone, like Worcestershire sauce, now seemed to Lou, in his nervousness, to be pouring out of the rest of the apartment through the keyhole and under the door. Glug, 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 went the bottle monotonously. Suddenly, up came the sound of music from the living room, and there were murmurs and the scrapings of chair legs on the floor. "Thus ends," said the television announcer, "the 29,125... The 29... I don't even know how to read that number. The 200,920... Pause. I'm going to round up. The 29,000th chapter in the life of your neighbors and mine, the McGarveys. Footsteps were coming down the hall, and there was a knock on the bathroom door. "Just a sec," called Lou cheerily. Desperately, he shook the big bottle, trying to speed up the flow. His palms slipped a little in the wet glass, and the heavy bottle splashed into splinters on the tile floor. The door sprung open, and there was Gramps, dumbfounded, staring at the mess. "Well, boy," said Gramps at last, "looks like you've got some tidying up to do." And that was all he said. And he turned around, elbowed his way through the crowd, and locked himself in his bedroom. The Schwartzes contemplated Lou in incredulous silence for a moment longer, and then hurried back to the living room as though some horrible guilt would taint them too, if they looked too long. Morty stayed behind long enough to give Lou a quizzical, annoyed glance. Then he too went into the living room, leaving only Emerald standing in the doorway. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Oh, you poor lamb. Please don't look so awful. It was my fault. I put you up to this." "No," said Lou, finally finding his voice. "Really, you didn't. Honest, Em. I was just... You don't have to explain anything to me, hun. I'm on your side no matter what." She kissed him on his cheek and whispered in his ear, "It wouldn't have been murder, hun. It wouldn't have killed him. It wasn't such a terrible thing to do. It just would have fixed him up so he wouldn't have been able to go anytime God decided he wanted him." "Oh, what's going to happen next, Em?" said Lou hollowly. "What's he going to do?" Lou and Emerald stayed fearfully awake almost all night, waiting to see what Gramps was going to do. But not a sound came from the sacred bedroom. At 2 hours before dawn, the pair dropped off to sleep. At 6 o'clock, they arose again, for it was time for their generation to eat breakfast in the kitchenette. No one spoke to them. They had their 20 minutes in which to eat, but their reflexes were so dulled by the bad night that they had hardly swallowed 2 mouthfuls of egg-type processed seaweed before it was time to surrender their places to their son's generation. Then, as was the custom for whomever had been most recently disinherited, they began preparing Gramps' breakfast, which would presently be served to him in bed on a tray. They tried to be cheerful about it. The toughest part of the job was having to handle honest-to-God eggs and bacon and oleomargarine, on which Gramps spent almost all of the income from his fortune. "Well," said Emerald, "I'm not going to get all panicky until I'm sure there's something to be panicky about." "Maybe he doesn't know what it was I busted," said Lou hopefully. "Probably. He thinks it was your watch crystal," said Eddie, their son, who was toying apathetically with his buckwheat-type processed sawdust cakes. "Don't get sarcastic with your father," said Em, "and don't talk with your mouth full either." "I'd like to see anybody take a mouthful of this stuff and not say something," said Eddie, who was 73. He glanced at the clock. It's time to take Gramps' breakfast, you know." "Yeah, it is, isn't it?" said Lou weakly, and he shrugged. "Let's have the tray, Em." We'll both go. Walking slowly and smiling bravely, they found a large semicircle of long-faced Schwartzes standing around the bedroom door. M knocked. Gramps, breakfast is ready. The door swung open before her fist, and in the middle of the room, the soft, deep, wide, canopied bed, the symbol of the sweet by and by to every Schwartz, was empty. A sense of death, as unfamiliar to the Schwartzes as Zoroastrianism or the cause of the Sepoy Mutiny, stilled every voice and slowed every heart. Awed, the heirs began to search gingerly under the furniture and behind the drapes for all that was mortal of Gramps, father of their race. But Gramps had left not his earthly husk, but a note, which Lou finally found on the dresser under a paperweight which was a treasured souvenir from the 2000 World's Fair. Unsteadily, Lou began to read it aloud. Somebody who I have sheltered and protected and taught these best I know how all these years, last night turned on me like a mad dog and diluted my anti-gerasone, or tried to. I am no longer a young man. I can no longer bear the crushing burden of life as I once could. So, after last night's bitter experience, I say goodbye. The cares of this world will soon drop away like a cloak of thorns, and I shall know peace. By the time you find this, I will be gone. Gosh, said Willie brokenly. He didn't even get to see how the 500-mile speedway race was going to come out. Or the World Series, said Eddie. Or whether Mrs. McGarvey got her eyesight back, said Morty. There's more, said Lou, and he began to read aloud again. I, Harold D. Schwartz, do hereby make, publish, and declare this to be my last will and testament, hereby revoking any and all former will and codicils by me at any time heretofore made. No, cried Willie, not another one. I do stipulate, read Will, that all my property in whatsoever kind and nature be divided, but do devise and bequeath it to be held in common by my issue, without regard for generation, equally share and share alike. Issue, said Emerald. Lou included the multitude in the sweep of hand. It means we all own the whole damn shooting match. All eyes instantly turned to the bed. Share and share alike, said Morty. Actually, said Willie, who was the oldest person present, it's just like the old system where the oldest people head things up in their headquarters here. And, oh, I like that, said Em. Lou owns as much of it as you do. I say it ought to be for the oldest one who's still working. You can snooze around here all day waiting for your pension check, and poor Lou stumbles in here after work all tuckered out, and how about letting somebody who's never had any privacy have a crack at it? Said Eddie hotly. Hell, you old people had plenty of privacy back when you were kids. I was born and raised in the middle of the goddamn barracks of the hall. How about yeah, said Morty. Sure, you've all had it pretty tough, and my heart bleeds for you, but try honeymooning in the hallway for a real kick. Silence, shouted Willie imperiously. The next person who opens his mouth spends the next 6 months by the bedroom. Now clear out of my room. I want to think. A vase shattered against the wall, inches above his head. In the next moment, a free-for-all was underway, with each couple battling to eject every other couple from the room. Fighting coalitions formed and dissolved with lightning changes of the tactical situation. Em and Lou were thrown into the hall, where they organized others in the same situation and stormed back into the room. After 2 hours of struggle, with nothing like a decision in sight, the cops broke in. For the next half hour, patrol wagons and ambulances hauled away the Schwartzes, and then the apartment was still and spacious. An hour later, the films of the last stages of the riot were being televised to 500 million delighted viewers on the eastern seaboard. In the stillness of the 3-room Schwartz apartment on the 76th floor of Building 257, the television set had been left on. Once more, the air was filled with the cries and grunts and crashes of the fray, coming harmlessly now from the loudspeaker. The battle also appeared on the screen of the television set in the police station, where the Schwartzes and their captors watched with professional interest. Em and Lou were in adjacent 4x8 cells, and they were all stretched out peacefully on their cots. Em, cried Lou through the partition, you got a wash basin all your own too? Sure, wash basin, bed, light, the works. Ha! And we thought Gramps' room was something. How long's this been going on? She held out her hand. For the first time in 40 years? Hun, I haven't got the shakes. Cross your fingers, said Lou. The lawyer, he's going to try to get us a year. Gee, said Em dreamily. I wonder what kind of wires you'd have to pull to get solitary. All right, pipe down, said the turnkey, or I'll toss the whole kit and caboodle of you right out. And the first one who lets on to anybody outside how good jail is ain't never going to get back in. And the prisoners instantly fell silent. The living room of the Schwartz apartment darkened for a moment as the riot scenes faded, and then the face of the announcer appeared like a sun coming from behind a cloud. And now, friends, he said, I have a special message from the makers of anti-gerasone, a message for all you folks over 150. Are you hampered socially by wrinkles, by stiffness of joints, and discoloration or loss of hair? All because these things came upon you before anti-gerasone was developed? If you are, you no longer need to suffer. You need no longer feel different and out of things. After years of research, medical science has now developed super anti-gerasone. In weeks, yes, weeks, you can look, feel, and act as young as your great-great-grandchildren. Wouldn't you pay $5,000 to be indistinguishable from everybody else? Well, you don't have to. Safe, tested, super anti-gerasone costs you only $1 a day. The average cost of regaining all the sparkle and attractiveness of youth is less than $50. Right now, for your free trial carton, just put your name and address on a $1 postcard and mail it to Super, Box 500,000, Schenectady, New York. Have you got that? I'll repeat it. Super Box. Underlining the announcer's words and was the scratching of Gramps' fountain pen, the one Willie had given him in the night before. He'd come in a few moments previous from the Idle Hour Tavern, which commanded a view of Building 257 across a square of asphalt known as Alden Village Green. He'd called a cleaning woman in to straighten the place up. He'd hired the best lawyer in town to get his descendants a conviction. Gramps then moved his daybed before the television screen so that he could watch from a reclining position, something he'd dreamed of doing for years. Schenectady, mouthed Gramps. Got it! His face had changed remarkably. His facial muscles seemed to have relaxed, revealing a kind equanimity under what had been taut, bad-tempered lines. It was almost as though his trial package of super anti-gerasone had already arrived. And when something amused him on television, he smiled easily, rather than barely managing to lengthen the thin line of his mouth a millimeter. Life was good. He could hardly wait to see what was going to happen next. And that's it. This was written in 1953, long before coronavirus kept us all together in our houses. Some of you might be feeling kind of cramped and tramped in like the Schwartz family. But let me caution you, please don't commit crimes to go to jail to have some free space. I like you, be safe, make smart choices, and I'm going to unpack bits and pieces of this story in my next episode. Be well.